Welcome to the deep dive. We're doing something a bit different today. Forget comparing countries for a second.
Right.
We've got this internal assessment. It's called Algeria. Internal Living Worthiness Analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And think of it like a fast track, really, to understanding daily life in Algeria, but seen purely from the inside.
Exactly. No external benchmarks, just what it's like there.
So this is our deep dive, tailored for you, pulling out the core truths, affordability, the economy, quality of life, society, politics, all based on how things look from within Algeria itself.
Precisely. We're digging into this detailed report to really unpack living and working in Algeria now. The goal is to nail down those crucial insights.
Like what specifically?
Well, the real challenge of balancing Algerian dinar earnings with dinar costs, what job opportunities actually exist on the ground, the standard of essential services you can realistically expect.
Okay.
And the social side, safety, plus how the political climate shapes things, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly. It's Algeria through an internal lens.
Got it. Okay, let's start where most people probably feel at first. Money. The affordability equation. Dinar in, dinar out.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at costs in euros or dollars, but this report really hammers home the real story is local costs versus local income.
Absolutely. And what jumps out straight away is how much it varies, even between the big cities.
Like Algiers versus Oran.
Exactly. Algiers, the capital, is predictably pricier, especially rent. Oran, interestingly, seems maybe a little bit cheaper than the national average for expenses. Now, the report does mention that detailed data for Constantine is a bit sparse, but we can probably guess it fits the general pattern.
Okay, let's get specific then. Rent. That seems like a big one in the cities.
Huge. For a one-bedroom in central Algiers, you're talking roughly 164 to 205 euro a month.
Right.
A three-bedroom, that jumps to 266 to 353.
Wow. And outside the center, does it get much better?
Somewhat. A one-bedroom might be 102 euro to 128, a three-bedroom 174 to 238. But here's the key thing the report stresses.
What's that?
It's the sheer burden this represents compared to what people actually earn locally in dinars.
Right. That's the crucial context.
Yeah.
Those euro figures don't mean much without the dinar income comparison.
Exactly. Then there's food. Basics bread, rice, milk seem quite affordable in dinar terms.
Okay.
But things like chicken, and especially beef,
Okay.
the cost really climbs relative to average wages. The report even notes, lower income families might only eat meat infrequently.
Really? Infrequent.
That's what it suggests. And even a simple meal out, it's maybe 2.40 to 2.80, which adds up fast over a month.
And it's not just food and rent.
Right.
Getting around.
Well, the good news there seems to be public transport in cities is pretty cheap.
Okay.
And gasoline is heavily subsidized, so filling your tank isn't the shock it might be elsewhere.
But there's a catch.
Yeah, the report points this out clearly. Fuel's cheap, great. Buying a car in the first place, that's a major hurdle for many people. The upfront cost is high.
Okay. So day-to-day commuting might be manageable, but car ownership itself is a barrier.
Precisely. Then you've got utilities, electricity, water. For an average apartment, seems fairly reasonable. Again, probably thanks to subsidies.
And connectivity. Internet, mobile.
Also seems pretty accessible cost-wise. Monthly internet, around 18 euro of Euro modal plans, 8 euro. Increasingly vital, obviously.
But here's the kicker. The report insists we can't just look at these costs in euros and think, oh, that's not so bad.
No, that's completely misleading.
The real picture is comparing these dinar costs to dinar incomes, because what looks cheap internationally can be a massive slice of a local salary.
That's the core issue. So let's talk income. The guaranteed minimum wage, SNMG, it's been 20,000 DZD a month since May 2020.
Okay, 20,000 dinars.
Ah.
About. What is that?
Well, the euro conversion isn't the point, but it's low. And the report is blunt. It's simply not enough to live independently.
How so?
Think about it. Renting even a basic one bed outside the city center, plus utilities, that can easily eat up the entire minimum wage, maybe even more.
Wow. That's stark. And the average salary, is it much higher?
Well, the report gives a figure around 42,848 DZD net per month from some sources, but
Right.
it also notes that, online chatter, anecdotal stuff suggests the felt average for many might be closer to 30,000 DZD.
So quite a gap, potentially, between official stats and lived reality.
Potentially, yes. And the report says for a genuinely comfortable life, especially if you're renting, you'd need way more, like $500 to $1,500 a month equivalent. It really highlights the squeeze.
Definitely shows the income disparity.
Absolutely. And salaries vary a lot, too. Finance pays better than customer service, obviously. Experience matters. Maybe region, though the data's a bit shaky there.
So the main point for our listener is
that lots of people are likely earning near that lower average, maybe around 40,000 DZD. And when basic costs, especially rent, are so high relative to that, it's tough.
Yeah.
Real financial pressure. The report mentions families surviving on maybe 50,000 DZD a month.
And the social safety net isn't catching everyone either, is it? You mentioned Social Security coverage.
Right. Effective coverage was only around 58% back in 2019. So a huge chunk of people, probably many in the informal sector, don't have that fallback.
Which brings us to the informal economy. The report flags that as important.
Critically important. It seems to be a major coping mechanism. People supplementing low formal wages, maybe working multiple jobs, relying on family, maybe remittances from abroad.
Shows resilience, but also the limits of the formal system.
Exactly. It underscores that the formal economy just isn't providing enough for a large part of the population.
So purchasing power. What can people actually buy?
Well, this is where it gets even clearer. The report cites cost estimates excluding rent for a single person, $430, and a family of four, $1,535.
Okay.
Now, those might represent a slightly higher standard of living, maybe, but compare that to the average incomes we discussed. They're often higher.
Higher than the average income even without rent.
Yes, and user comments mentioned in the report suggest around 450 euros a month with rent is barely enough. Unions estimate a family needs over 80,000 DZD for a minimum standard.
Wow. And how has this changed over time with inflation?
Good question. Old data from 2011 showed lots of spending on food, housing, transport, but the report makes a crucial point. Inflation has been significant since then, hitting 9.3% in 2023.
And the minimum wage hasn't budged since 2020.
Exactly. So that purchasing power from 2011, it's almost certainly eroded. People are likely spending even more of their income just on basics now.
It really paints a picture of a two-tier system almost.
That's what the report seems to suggest. If you own your home, have a stable, well-paid job, life can be relatively manageable, maybe even comfortable with the subsidies.
But if you're renting, low-wage, informal sector.
It's likely a constant struggle, an uphill battle just to make ends meet.
And Table 1 in the report apparently lays this out very clearly.
Very starkly. It puts estimated basic monthly costs, rent, utilities, food, transport, internet side by side with the minimum and average incomes.
And the result?
Even without rent, basic costs can top the minimum wage. Add rent, especially in cities, it can swallow almost all of an average salary. It clearly shows a significant affordability challenge for many Algerians.
Okay, so that's the personal finance picture. Let's zoom out a bit. The broader economic climate, job opportunities within Algeria, what's the overview?
It's a complex picture, as the report lays out. Algeria is technically an upper-middle income economy. GDP has grown recently. But persistent inflation is an issue, though maybe easing a bit now. And the absolutely dominant feature is the reliance on hydrocarbons, oil and gas.
Right. The report really highlights that. Even if it's not the biggest direct employer, it drives exports and government revenue massively.
Hugely. It accounts for the vast majority of exports and a huge chunk of government money.
Which creates vulnerabilities, I assume.
Enormous vulnerabilities. When oil and gas prices are high, like they have been recently, great. Money flows in, reserves grow, government finances look okay.
But when prices fall?
Exactly. Budget deficits, government debt can rise quickly. The whole economy is basically riding the waves of global energy markets. Extremely volatile.
And the report mentions Dutch disease.
Right.
Can you break that down for us in the Algerian context?
Sure. It's basically when a booming natural resource sector like oil and gas kind of crowds out everything else.
How does that happen?
Well, the massive export revenue can push up the value of the local currency, the dinar. That makes other Algerian products, manufacturing, agriculture, more expensive and less competitive internationally.
Ah, I see. So it hinders diversification.
Precisely. It makes it harder for other sectors to grow and create jobs. Plus, the government's budget roller coaster tied to oil prices affects funding for everything else, public services, infrastructure investment, you name it.
And this ties into the social contract idea.
Yeah, historically, the government used oil money to provide services and subsidies. When that revenue fluctuates wildly, it strains that relationship. And, the report also hints that this dominance can create openings for rent-seeking or corruption perceptions.
A tangled web. So how does this play out in the actual job market? What's employment like?
That's a major worry highlighted in the report. Unemployment is persistently high, around 11–12% overall.
Which is significant.
It is. And youth unemployment is particularly alarming, over 30% in 2023.
Over 30%. Wow.
Yeah. So despite a big labor force, the economy just isn't creating enough jobs, especially for young people entering the market. The new unemployment benefit helps individuals, but adds more pressure on public finances.
What are the root causes of this high unemployment, according to the report?
Several structural things seem to be going on. A mismatch between skills people have and skills employers need, especially in the private sector.
Oh.
Maybe the private sector just isn't big or dynamic enough to absorb everyone. Plus, Algeria has a very young population. Lots of people needing jobs every year.
Which creates social pressure.
Huge pressure. It can push people to the informal economy, fuel desires to emigrate, and contribute to social discontent like we saw with the Iraq movement. The key point is, economic growth isn't automatically creating enough jobs.
So diversification is the obvious answer, but we know that's hard. What efforts are being made? Does Algeria have other industries?
It does. The report notes there's an existing industrial base, light manufacturing, mining, petrochemicals, food processing. Agriculture is also significant, actually contributes quite a bit to GDP.
And the government is pushing diversification.
Publicly, yes. Very committed, apparently. They've set targets for boosting non-hydrocarbon exports, like aiming for $29 billion by 2030.
Is there any sign it's working? Are non-hydrocarbon exports growing?
There is some progress, yes.
Yeah.
The report mentions increases in things like fertilizers, cement, iron and steel exports. Mining output is up too.
But there are hurdles.
Big ones. That path dependency is strong. The whole economy is geared towards hydrocarbons. Shifting that takes time and effort.
Makes sense.
Also, some of the non-hydrocarbon successes are in energy-intensive industries themselves, which raises sustainability questions long-term, with carbon pricing and the global energy transition.
Right.
And compensation in potentially high-growth areas like tech or advanced services isn't always competitive internationally. So attracting and keeping talent can be tough. Genuine diversification needs a much better business climate.
Which brings us neatly to the business environment. What's it like starting or running a business there?
Well, the government has been making changes since 2020. New laws on hydrocarbons, foreign ownership, investment, money, and credit. All supposedly aimed at improving things.
Okay.
Their action plan prioritizes private sector growth, reducing imports, boosting those non-hydrocarbon exports.
Sounds positive on paper, but is it translating to reality?
The report suggests maybe not fully yet. There seem to be significant practical challenges remaining.
Like what?
Deep-rooted bureaucracy is a constant complaint. It causes delays, costs, frustration.
Despite the new laws.
Apparently. Perceptions of corruption are also still a major concern, creating uncertainty. There seems to be a gap between policy intent and actual implementation. Even something like e-commerce adoption faces hurdles, trust issues, infrastructure reliability, payment systems. These probably reflect broader difficulties for entrepreneurs, especially in tech. The whole regulatory landscape can feel complex, maybe stifling growth.
So potential, but still tricky to navigate. Table 2 in the report summarizes key economic trends.
Yeah, it's a useful snapshot. GDP growth did rebound after 2020, but unemployment, especially youth unemployment, stays stubbornly high.
And inflation.
Spiked in 2022-23, looks like it's easing a bit now.
Yeah.
But crucially, that hydrocarbon share of exports, still very high, underscores the dependency.
Right.
We saw current account surpluses recently, probably due to high energy prices. But the government budget has generally been in deficit. It really shows that tension. Wanting diversified growth, but still relying heavily on oil and gas.
Okay, clear picture on the economy. Let's shift focus now to quality of life beyond just money. Essential services, infrastructure. What does the report say?
This is crucial for that living worthiness assessment, obviously. How good are healthcare, transport, utilities?
Healthcare first.
The report notes Algeria's historical commitment to free public healthcare since 1974. And that's reflected in pretty high life expectancy, which is good. There's a social insurance system, too.
Sounds like a decent foundation, but are there strains?
Exactly. That's the other side. The public system is likely under pressure. Population growth, changing health needs, and those volatile government budgets tied to oil.
It affects funding and resources.
Right, which can lead to inconsistent quality, long waits for appointments or procedures, and maybe differences in care between regions.
And not everyone is covered by Social Security.
Correct. That 58% coverage figure means a lot of people, likely in the informal sector, might face out-of-pocket costs or limitations within the public system. So free in principle, but maybe not equal access or quality for everyone in practice.
Okay. What about physical infrastructure? Transport, utilities, internet.
In the cities, public transport seems affordable. There's an extensive road network, helped by cheap fuel. Rail exists, though maybe not super efficient everywhere. Taxis are common.
And utilities.
Mm.
Electricity, water.
Generally available in urban areas, the report suggests. And costs are manageable, again, because of subsidies. Housing and utilities were actually the biggest non-food expense back in 2011.
Interesting, yeah. Anything else on infrastructure?
Well, connectivity, internet, and mobile seems widespread and relatively affordable, which is important. And there's a mention of Sonalgas, the energy company, investing in EV charging, a sign of modernization, perhaps.
So on the surface, especially in cities, basic infrastructure seems okay.
On the surface, yes, but the report hints at potential issues underneath.
Such as?
Likely disparities. Quality, reach, reliability probably differ a lot between big cities and rural or less developed areas. Historical spending patterns often reinforce that. And the subsidies themselves, while keeping costs low for users, might lead to underinvestment in maintenance and upgrades.
Meaning potential reliability issues. Power cuts, water shortages, patchy internet.
It's a possibility the report raises. It even links difficulties in e-commerce adoption, partly to concerns about internet consistency. So yes, accessible and affordable in cities, maybe, but questions remain about equity and reliability nationwide.
Makes sense. The nuances matter. Okay, let's move to something less tangible but just as important. The societal context. Safety, culture, daily life.
Right, the qualitative stuff. Safety and security, it's complex, partly because there isn't much public crime data.
But the past plays a role.
Definitely. The report emphasizes the dark decade, the civil conflict in the 1990s. That experience really shakes attitudes towards stability and order today. People value peace.
And the Iraq movement.
That showed underlying societal tensions exist, even if it was largely peaceful. So safety perception isn't just about crime stats.
What else influences it?
Well, the legacy of conflict, the value placed on order, the visible security presence, which people might view differently, plus economic anxieties, job worries. Cost of living can make people feel less secure, and those corruption perceptions can erode trust. So safety is multifaceted, subjective, probably varies a lot.
What about the cultural fabric, the positive side of daily life?
The report describes a really rich culture, shaped by history, geography, Islamic traditions which influence social life, holidays, food, family law. The weekly rhythm,
Family is central.
hugely central, both socially and economically supportive. Surveys apparently show this consistently.
And language.
Diverse, Arabic is official, Tamazight is national, but French is still widely used business, education, administration.
So a mix of tradition and modernity.
Very much so. Hospitality and community ties are strong social customs. You see traditional markets alongside modern shops, though online shopping is still developing.
Leisure activity.
Cafes are big, sports, cinema, and especially visiting family and friends. It's this blend, this negotiation between old norms and new practices. There's no single Algerian way of life. Depends on where you are, who you are.
Fascinating mix. Okay, final big piece. The political sphere, governance and its influence.
This is the framework for everything else. Algeria is a presidential republic, bicameral parliament. The state plays a huge role in the economy and society. State companies, public spending, subsidies.
And stability.
Well, relative stability has been maintained since the early 2000s, but the Iraq movement in 2019 really exposed underlying tensions and demands for change.
Stability, but maybe fragile.
Or at least not universally accepted as the only goal. The state prioritizes stability, sometimes using security measures. Iraq led to leadership changes. President Tebboune came in. But the report suggests fundamental power structures haven't shifted dramatically.
And the state's legitimacy relies on.
Partly on maintaining that order and partly on distributing the oil wealth. But Iraq showed many people want more than just stability. They want deeper reforms. So potential for ongoing friction.
How does this governance system impact daily life? Tangibly.
Bureaucracy comes up a lot. It's cited as a major challenge, frustrating, slow, hindering business, even despite those reform efforts like the investment law.
Okay, bureaucracy. What else?
Concerns about civil liberties, freedom of expression, especially post-Iraq. Reports mention pressure on activists, journalists, maybe self-censorship despite constitutional guarantees.
And corruption.
Perceptions remain high, tracked by international indices. This erodes trust, makes dealing with the state harder, more complex.
The report calls the state embedded.
Yeah, meaning it's deeply involved in everything. You can't avoid interacting with bureaucracy, so that mixed procedures, maybe lack of transparency, corruption worries, limits on freedoms, it all shapes the citizen-state relationship and how easy or difficult life feels.
And understanding Iraq is key to understanding today.
Absolutely. It started in Feb 2019 against Bouteflika's fifth term, but grew much bigger. Demands for political and economic reform, fighting corruption, a state led by civilians, not the military old guard.
And it was huge and peaceful.
Remarkably so. Huge scale, lasted months, mostly peaceful, and it did lead to Bouteflika resigning.
But the core issues remain.
That's the argument. Street protests died down, partly COVID, partly state management, but the demands, the political awareness Iraq created, still there.
And the government response.
Elections, constitutional changes, anti-corruption drives. But critics say it's not systemic change, and measures restricting dissent have also come in.
So it's unresolved.
Unresolved, and you have to see it against the backdrop of the 1990s Civil War. That trauma means for some, stability is everything. For others, especially younger people, fundamental reform is vital. Iraq's agenda is unfinished. Its legacy shapes everything: expectations, politics, policy. Creates ongoing tension, adjustment.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Affordability, economy, quality of life, society, politics, all from inside Algeria. It's clearly complex, full of contrast.
It really is. And pulling it all together, the report's bottom line seems to be that living worthiness in Algeria isn't one single thing. It's highly stratified. Depends massively on your socioeconomic position.
So for the average person without assets or a great formal job.
The reality is challenging. That affordability crunch we started with, high housing costs versus low wages, minimum wage not cutting it, that's a dominant factor.
Plus limited job opportunities.
Right. High unemployment, slow diversification, tricky business environment. Add the vulnerability from relying on oil and gas.
And inconsistencies in public services.
Exactly. Variable quality and reliability. Then layer on the governance issues, bureaucracy, corruption perception, civil liberty concerns, and those underlying political tensions from Iraq. For many, it adds up to significant economic pressure, limited chances. Data gaps don't help either.
But it's different for others.
Yes. If you own your home outright or have a stable, well-paid job, maybe state sector, oil industry, specialized private role life can be much more comfortable.
Right.
You benefit more from the subsidies. You're probably better equipped to navigate the bureaucracy and other challenges. So the report really highlights this significant divide in lived experience based purely on socioeconomic status.
So the key takeaway for our listener from this internal deep dive is Algeria is a complex, contrasting picture. Living worthiness really depends on who you are and what resources you have.
Precisely. And maybe the biggest underlying theme that emerges is this tension between the state's traditional role as provider, using that oil wealth, and people's growing desire for more economic opportunity and more political say, more agency.
A tension really highlighted by Iraq.
Exactly. And that tension continues to shape the lived experience right now.
It really makes you think how external factors, which we deliberately avoided today, might change this picture even further.
Indeed. A whole other deep dive, perhaps. But for now, hopefully, this internal look has given you, our listener, a richer, more nuanced understanding of daily life for Algerians, seen from their own perspective.
Join us next time as we delve into another compelling topic.